Is there a video? Video, yeah.
As a CEO, I'm obviously for academisation in schools that really want to be an academy. I wasn't forced to become an academy, it was the right choice for my group of schools. I'm totally against academisation of schools who wish not to take that path, and there are many, many other options.
Usually it's because you've been made eligible for forced academisation, and that's usually been because the school standards perhaps are below what they should be.
We were feeling like it was forced academisation for us as a single academy to have to join one of the Catholic multi-academy trust. The feeling was that there was no choice.
If I hadn't have had the support from NHT, then we probably would have gone down the line, and we knew we'd put in place a series of measures and we had improved the school. It would have just stopped everything that we were doing, and we'd have had to start again. All of your work as a head teacher would be in trying to change that structure and not on the teaching and learning, which is your core purpose.
Schools must be able to make their own choice. It isn't that academisation is a bad thing at all. It just has to be done properly, and it has to be individual to each individual school and what is right for them, for their children, for their local community.
We need to act swiftly, but have a very, very clear plan about how we are going to improve the education system in England and indeed in the UK.
School leaders are the people who have been holding together a broken system for the past 10 years.
The NHT are behind you and are talking to the government the whole time.
The encouragement, the empowerment that they actually give you in your day-to-day roles, I couldn't have done without it.
It's part of a community of people who are wanting the very, very best for our profession.
When our collective voice is heard on behalf of our children, it can't be ignored.
Good morning, conference. We see smiles everywhere, please. Give us a wave. Good morning. First of all, I'd just like to thank you all last night and the regional dinners for making Tim and I feel so welcome. It was brilliant to come around and see everybody connecting again, back together, enjoying each other's company, and we were made to feel very welcome. So I hope you had a great evening. We're going to have another great evening tonight. Those of you who are attending the gala dinner, another chance for you to meet up with friends or make new ones. So looking forward to a great day of some debate later, and we've got some excellent speakers as well. So we're going to kick off, though, with a very important visitor. I think I'm going to introduce Serda Ferret he's the CEO of Lifter, who are quite a significant sponsor for NHT. We've also got a bit of a connection. Serda and I went to the same secondary school in East London. So goodness knows how we managed to end up on stage here today. Serda.
Paul. Can everybody hear me? Lovely. Thank you, Paul. Colleagues, I'm going to start with a personal story today in light of the tragic events that have unfolded in Ukraine, and also due to the wonderful themes of conference today. This is a photo of my dad when he was a fresh-faced, newly qualified teacher in Cyprus, where he's from. The photo was taken in the early 70s, and I know it was taken before 1974 because he doesn't have a moustache. I know exactly when he grew his moustache. He grew it in the summer of 1974. That's when there was armed conflict in Cyprus, and my dad was given a gun, and he said the first thing I did when I held the gun was I told myself, I'm bloody not going to shoot anyone. He was captured by Greek Cypriot soldiers and taken to a prisoner of war camp where he was held for over 3 months. And this was a significant event in my dad's life. It was deeply scarring, as you might imagine, but it also shaped his character. A few years later, he moved to England, where I was born and raised, initially in Canning Town, which is also where Paul's from. And then in my early teens, we moved to North London, to a part of North London that was home to lots of Greek and Turkish Cypriots. Now, we changed school. I moved from Paul's school to another school. And in that school, there were going to be lots of Greek Cypriot children. And we'd never met Greek Cypriot children, my brothers and I. So my dad sat us down and he said, look, you're going to have Greek Cypriot kids in your school. And I want you to actively make friends with them. And being Cypriot didn't stop at just making friends with them. He said, you have to invite them to our house for dinner, because that's obviously what you do when you're friends. And he said, I want them to see that you're human, and I want you to see that they're human. So he basically forced us to make friends with Greek Cypriot kids, and we did that. And this is a photo of Nikki Xenophontos, probably my best friend in the world, who's also one of the godmothers of my child. And Nikki's brother now works at Lifter. So there's a relation to Lifter also. And why have I told you this story? I've told you this because I genuinely believe that what my dad tried to instill in us, this pursuit for empathy and understanding, is also a really important seed in what is Lifter today. Sticking with the theme of family, this is my son. When he was hacking into my phone aged 3.5. And this is a new kind of child, colleagues. This is a child who starts school with 3,500 hours of screen time under their belts. What kind of skills, values, and competencies are our children going to need so that they can thrive in our future world? Future-looking organisations have been telling us for years that there are a range of soft skills and competencies that they'll need. And what we've seen creeping into some of these reports, not post-pandemic yet, but since the pandemic, is the word humanity. And this is really exciting for us. We'll need to be much better at being human, an area where our education systems are notoriously weak. That comes from the World Economic Forum. Demand for human skills and compassionate human interaction will increase. That comes from Boston Consulting Group. So it's being more and more recognised. What are our children telling us? They're telling us that they are anxious about the future, that they feel a responsibility to make things better, but they also feel ill-equipped for this. They feel that they should be learning more about the real world at school. I'm going to skip the trailer because you can watch that at our stand, and I know that I've got limited time. So what is Lifter? With Lifter, what we're doing is we're offering children, we're inviting them to explore and experience lots of different slices of life from lots of different people around the world. And you can see that visualized on our stand where I'll invite you to visit later. These are the areas that we help schools with. So nurturing cultural capital, teaching key concepts about equality and diversity, sustainability education is another area that we're really strong in, social emotional learning, and character education in particular. The Sustainable Development Goals are really important for us. They run through all of the content and all of the lessons and assemblies on Lifter. With Lifter, we leverage storytelling. It's one of the oldest and strongest teaching tools there is. And it works because multisensory experiences are remembered for far longer and in more detail. And we know this from neuroscience, and we know that deep learning can only occur when emotional learning and cognitive learning happen together. This is a seminal study from Imordino, Yang, and Damasio. Imordino, Yang also worked with Sylvan, and they found that inspiring human stories, stories of resilience, actually help us by giving us intrinsic motivation. And this is a really brilliant study that I recommend you all look up. And on the subject of motivation, I invite you to look at these children who are talking about their experiences of Lifter and just see how powerful these are.
Great website. I love it.
It drew me in, and it was how it was set out.
It's more engaging than just watching something on a screen.
Because you can press stuff and then it do stuff.
Because you're there and you're immersed in it, and you can interact with it more than just reading it, and you can see it and be it.
We come back and we see that Lifter's on. Everyone
sort of goes, yes. It's because it educates you in a fun way. It taught us in a good way that we would remember it and understand it as well.
You didn't have to work hard to keep your focus. You could work hard to learn. You could use that energy on learning.
I hope this is the future of learning, I guess. I hope it is.
When you grow up in your area, you know your story and you know the stories of the people you're like around, but you don't know the stories of people who've had like completely different upbringings. I think hearing stories from people like across the globe, it sort of puts everything in perspective.
In real life, we're glued to one outlook. We can only see what we see. We can only feel what we feel. If we somehow allow ourselves to interact our emotions and our viewpoints with other people's, then we can become better than if it was only one person.
Very, very impactful. They helped kind of structure this idea of kind of common humanity between all of us, this idea of connectivity and diversity across the world. And I genuinely think that younger children being exposed to that more often would be crucial to their education, because it shows them their world is not flat or 2D. It shows them the wider world. When I was younger, I grew up in a very rural area of this country and didn't really see the world outside of it. Didn't see a motorway until I was 10. And I think if I was younger and I'd been shown those things, it would have been a lot more impactful for me.
Thank you. This is a case study from 2017 in Essex, from a very monocultural school. And the teacher worked with us to build a baseline survey to see where the students were at in terms of general levels of empathy, as well as attitudes towards people from different backgrounds. And one of the questions in the survey was, how much common ground do you think you might be able to have with each of these people? And understandably, children who'd had very little exposure to people from different backgrounds felt that they could have much more in common with the people who looked more like themselves. So person 1, person 4, and person 6. But over a period of time, they got to know all of these 6 people through the immersive story worlds. They explore their homes and workplaces, look around, click on things, understand their context, watch the documentaries, and they did a number of exercises related to PSHE, English, geography, etc. Did another survey at the end of that series, and their understanding or the feeling of connection they had with all of these people grew significantly, particularly towards the people of colour. And the biggest change came towards number 5, Mohammed, who started off as number 5 and went up to number 1. He was the person they felt the greatest connection with. And this was a big surprise for us. We presented this at a TEDx in 2017, and it was picked up by the University of Tampere in Finland, who did a proper study on it, a proper academic study over a couple of years. And they actually found that the immersive stories helped to reduce social anxiety around meeting people from different backgrounds and identities, which is a huge finding for us. They also found that the immersive stories are significantly more powerful than the documentaries alone. Our vision at Lifter is that by the time a child leaves school, they'll have had a meaningful learning experience in every country in the world. They'll have experienced lots of different slices of life, lots of different people in different jobs, from different backgrounds and cultures and identities, from different perspectives. They'll see for themselves how interconnected we are and how interdependent we are. And we feel that this would be a gift to give children before they leave school. We've got a very special offer for you at the stand today. I'm not going to say what it is, so I don't want you to come because of the special offer. But if you're interested in what you've seen, please do come to the stand. I'm going to leave you with
we found
Principal Simon Wood and his words.
By recognising that it actually was a priority. So it was a priority for us, for children, to become more aware of the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda, more aware of the world around them, more aware of other people. And then we realised quite quickly as educators, this is not a bolt-on. This underpins absolutely every bit of our curriculum. So it wouldn't matter which story world or Lifter time you asked me to pick up an experience with the children, I could link part of our curriculum to it. It's not the other way around.
Thank you, Serda, and thank you, Lifter, for your continued support. Thank you. Excellent, thank you. As president, you do get to choose a presidential charity for your term. And I mean, where do you start? So I took counsel from my colleagues, and they said, choose something with a personal connection. So I'd like to invite Peter Teal from Cardiac Risk in the Young to say some words. Thank you. Getting wobbly.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can all hear me. Okay, if I start this statement by saying at least 12 young adults aged between 14 and 35 die unexpectedly in the UK every week from undetected heart conditions, that is a fact. And it now escalates probably into the 20s. And my involvement with this and these tragedies and these young deaths that shouldn't really be happening is that on September the 14th, 2009, after a normal evening in my home, I said good night to my two daughters. The last words I said to them was, I'll text you tomorrow to let you know about the time that you've got to take the dog to the groomers. I said good night to both of them, I love you. And the next time I saw my eldest daughter, she'd died in her sleep and she was dead in bed. Zoe died of an undetected heart condition, and I can only tell you how devastating it is that when you're a parent that you lose your child. Your child shouldn't go before you. You should, in a circle of life, you should be the one that goes before your child. Zoe was taken away to a mortuary where a post-mortem was taking place, and 2 days later from the coroner's office I had a telephone call telling me that they couldn't find any reason why Zoe had died. They'd searched Zoe's room for drugs, for alcohol, for substance abuse, and I know damn well, as a competitive swimmer and a fitness instructor, I know she was very, very anti all these. So I was quite convinced that there was nothing. To lose a daughter, a child, and have no reason why she should die is not what should happen. And I'm a firm believer that I should have a reason why my daughter died. So, after having a heart sent away to be analysed by a local hospital, then we still had no results back. And this is getting really, really frustrating for me because as heartbroken as I wanted answers. So I went on a search engine and I just put in this condition called sudden cardiac death. As it was back in the time, 2009, it was sudden adult death syndrome. And a charity came up in the region of cardiac risk in the young. So I thought, I've got nothing to lose here. So I phoned up Cardiac Risk in the Young, and the actual founder of the charity actually picked the phone up, Alison Cox. And what a start it was for me, because she helped me every step of the way on what I needed to do. And to cut all the rigmarole out, Zoe's heart was eventually released and sent down to the Royal Brompton Hospital, part of the Cardiac Risk Young team, where a lady called Mary Shepherd did a separate post-mortem on Zoe's heart. The coroner actually put cardiomyopathy as a cause of death, and I knew it wasn't. And CRY found the real reason why she died. She died of a condition called Brugada syndrome. However, Zoe lies in a grave with the wrong death certificate, because once that happens by the coroner will not change his mind. And although I fought with MPs, but that's a separate story and another one. So what can I do? Okay, so I wasn't going to sit there. I don't want any other family to go through what I went through. Okay, it's not nice at all, and every day I relive that moment where I saw my daughter dead in bed. So I got off my backside and I started to do things like running, and I did a lot of charity work. I've gone out there not only to raise money, but I wanted to tell people. I wanted to tell people my story, and I've stood on shopping centres, I've stood in car boot sales, I've stood on markets, I've been everywhere to tell people this message. And it's great to be able to come here and tell you what's actually happened in my life. Okay. I work at a state boarding school, and they have embraced me absolutely beyond belief. I think on the first few weeks back after losing Zoe, I was put on suicide watch, because they care for me so much. But they've embraced what I believe in. And as the money started to come in, and I have raised a total at the moment, it stands at about £95,000. And in that time, I've actually paid for... Okay, I wanted to save one person's life, but the school embraced me and they've helped me support with the charity. And at the school that we do, we actually have a screening annually for every year 10 child that's coming through the age, because they hit the 14-year-old to 15-year-old mark, which is the start of where these heart conditions can actually escalate from. And if I stand here and tell you I only set out to save one person's life if I could, then we've probably gone into double figures now of lives. I've got parents' letters, I've got emails, I've got faxes, you name it. We have saved lots of people. Ladies and gentlemen, this sudden cardiac death is out there big time. It's unbelievable the detections that they're picking up now within CRY. That their research is going like deeper and deeper, and under the watchful eye of Professor Sharma, that these screenings are done. They have a backup disc that's sent back down to him, and not only is it studied on the day of the screening, it goes back into review when he has it as well, just to double check that these screenings are done properly. The screening itself, okay, they have 100 young adults screened on the day. We have three nurses who administrate this simple, non-invasive ECG, and they have an echogram on the day. The slightest detection that they get is straight to an echogram that's done on the day, and they are then forwarded then to any more detections down to the local cardiologist at your local hospital. And it's great. What CRY have done now is they've actually got 40 CRY fellows that they've actually funded, trained, and they're put out now into the NHS system. So hopefully now the more people that get detected, they are under the watchful eye of people that have worked with CRY, and they know that it's a different type of ECG than what we'd have at our local hospital, that they're trained to look at the long QT and different parts of it, which is great. They are a wonderful, wonderful charity. It's sad to be involved with it, but I'm proud of what I've done, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing to think that I could have saved one person's life. It's the only death you never have a chance to say goodbye to, and you should be there to hold that person's hand, and I wasn't, and I'll live with that to the day I die, and it's not the nicest of things. If anything you can do for me today, I don't ask for money, but please tell somebody what's happened. You know, I never knew anything about sudden cardiac death. I generally didn't. I probably watched on the television Terry Yorath, his son dropped down dead in the garden, and probably Mark Vivian Defoe playing in the African Nations Cup, who actually died running on the pitch, but I'd never heard of it. It's becoming more and more and more widespread now, and more high-profile deaths are happening out there. Or, you know, Christian Eriksen from Brentford now, or the former Spurs player, he's had it. Fabrice Muamba, he's had it. They're very, very lucky people, because 9 times out of 10 they don't come back. And when I went to see the cardiologist down in London, because they reviewed me, obviously CRY did, they follow the families through, and they actually want to help you to make sure whether you're clear as well and your children are clear. You know, it's just amazing. It really is amazing what they do for you. So please tell somebody, you know, over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine tonight, tell a friend, at least they're aware of it. If anybody wants these screenings, they are mostly done by bereaved families like me who raise the funds. It's CRY's philosophy that they would like to have a national screening campaign for every 14-year-old. They do it in Italy, and it's cut their deaths down by 80% in Italy. They're in nominal figures now, but we don't do it in our country. You know, we just don't do it. But they fight for this, and I've actually sat in Parliament working with MPs, and a lot of them were just oblivious. They just do not understand what it's like. And I did have a bit of a barney with the one, because he sort of got a bit hoity-toity with me, and I did actually have a blazing row with him across the table. So I think they got my message and what I believe in. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. There is some materials about CRY on the table. They're very small charities. There are a lot of medical people involved with them. So please have a look. And if you do have a fundraising event, perhaps in school, a non-uniform day or something like that, and want a charity to choose, then CRY is a good one. They do these screening events, as Peter was saying, when they will screen 100 people in a day, and they pick up 1 or 2 young people who may have a condition that could cause them to have sudden death. So there's also going to be a QR code on the table tonight. So none of the excuses that I have, I've got no money in my dinner jacket. There's a QR code, I believe, so you'll be able to donate directly at the gala dinner. So that's the charity for my presidential year. Now, the presidential charity of Tim was education support. And we are continuing a relationship, because they do excellent work at supporting teachers and school leaders. And so therefore, we've got Sinead McBrearty to speak to us this morning. So would you give a warm welcome to Sinead? Thank you.
Thanks a million, Paul. That's a very sombre and sobering start to the day. Peter's story is very moving. And I know that you, members of NAHT, will be very generous in supporting CRY. And Serdar, thank you for your presentation and your story as well. Also very moving. When we got to the substance of Lifta's work, I just wondered if you might develop a module for the Home Office at any point in time, just as a little business development idea from me to you. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm going to just test and see, yeah, the slides are working. I want to thank Tim for having us as Charity of the Year last year and Paul for inviting us again this year. And I don't know if the NAHT has a collective noun for past presidents, but Ruth and Judy have also been great advocates for the charity, so we'll have to develop a word if there isn't one in the lexicon already. Education support, if you haven't heard of us, I don't know where you've been last year, frankly, if you haven't heard of us, because we've been all over your events, and you may be bored witless, but we're going to come at you again today. We exist to support everyone working in education in all settings and in all roles. That's what we do as a charity, and we've been doing that for 145 years. We do it because we believe that better health leads to better outcomes, both for our children and young people and also for our professionals, for our workforce, for our lives. The work that we do has some very serious elements to it. We have a free helpline, the 08000 number, again available to everybody in every setting. And through that we deal with some really serious calls and issues. But most of the calls that we take are from people who don't have somewhere else to turn to have a conversation that might be difficult for them. And so they know they can always find a listening ear and a qualified listening ear on the end of a phone when they call education support. We also have seen over the last quarter an enormous rise in the number of people approaching us in financial distress. This goes back to the benevolent roots of our charity and where we were founded. And we're not surprised, given the cost of living issues that we see, to find this increase. But I imagine it's something that we'll be telling more stories about over the next 12 months. There's a load of resources on our website for anyone who wants to find policies and support and information, either for the school or staff members who are interested in stuff personally. You can find good resources there. We've just produced something recently with the Royal College of Psychiatrists and a consortia of their colleagues that has some really detailed, strong information for school leaders, but also for teachers and school staff more generally. The other stuff that we do is to work with schools directly to try and help schools to become better workplaces. And we do that because we think that's a good shortcut to improving the well-being of everyone working in the sector. So we have an employee assistance program that we've developed to make sure it works well for schools. We offer free peer support, 6 sessions of peer support for school leaders, or 6 sessions of individual professional supervision for leaders. We have spaces on those programs still, and my colleague Damien is on the stand outside if you're interested for yourself or for others to just pass your information on and you can find out more about it. And in Wales, of course, we have a very heavily oversubscribed advisory service where our team goes into schools and helps to develop policies or to train staff. That's a service we hope to extend across other regions in the UK before too long. And the last thing we do is research the health and well-being of the workforce. If we just did the other stuff, we'd broadly be working in a fairly reactive way and responding to the symptoms of stress within the sector. But by researching health and advocating for change, we can start to get into conversations that maybe make some positive change before we're at the stage where symptoms appear. So that's something that we choose to put our resources to work on. And we have some success in that space. Sometimes it's very easy to look out across the policy environment and become a bit despondent. Obviously not for me, because I'm not in that business. But I've heard of people who can become despondent when they look at the policy environment. The one bright light I take out of this is that we have made some change. Small change, but nonetheless we have got the government to acknowledge that we need to do something around the well-being of leaders and education staff more broadly. There are those small changes we can build on step by step, and I think that's the journey that we are on. I started working at Education Support 3 years ago, and at that point in time, discussing staff well-being was still really a specialist sport. People didn't talk about staff well-being with a lot of seriousness or attention in any of the policy environments that we were in, and that's changed. It has now become almost impossible to have a conversation about educational policy change and not discuss the workforce. So we have, in a very short period of time, actually come quite a long way in that journey, and I do believe that over the next 5 years we can make some significant changes that will improve the well-being of the workforce, but do that by getting rid of some of the clutter that gets in the way of people being able to do their job and work in the way that they want to as professionals. So that's the journey that I think we're on. There's a lot of information on our website. There's a lot of evidence. I'm not going to take you through the slides or the many pages of data. You'll be pleased to know the morning after your regional events. That would be kind of a form of punishment, so we'll let you off on this occasion. But I will raise a couple of the big themes that we see in the research that we've been doing over the last 5 years. So we produce something called the Teacher Wellbeing Index each year, and the last one was the 5th edition of this. So we could start to see some themes that over time are not going away. They're very definitely issues. Unsurprisingly, stress and anxiety are top of the list. They were high before we ever went into pandemic. And actually what we saw after the first lockdown was a dip, remarkably, in stress and anxiety in the profession. There are reasons for that, which I'll come on to a bit later. But stress and anxiety have increased again, and they are disproportionately high in the education workforce, higher than in other professions across the UK. That's not just me saying that. The Health and Safety Executive says the same thing. COVID is still an issue, even though for many parts of the country, people feel that COVID is in the past tense. The legacy of absence in schools continues to be a major driver of stress across the piece. Something for us all to note is that in education, more than in other professions, people experience barriers to reaching out for help. So people do not feel comfortable to say, I'm experiencing unmanageable stress, or I have a diagnosis of a mental health condition that is relevant to my work and I might need some support with. Other sectors of the economy, other areas of employment, are those in which people are faster to feel like they can say that. So there is something for us to think about in education where it's still not a safe remark for somebody to make or a disclosure for somebody to make. We have work to do around stigma, I think. And some of the reasons for those barriers go back to, I think, the desire that's deep-seated across the public sector and in care work. There's a lot of commonality where people feel their job is to care for the children and the young people, and oftentimes feel that taking care of themselves or attending to themselves or disclosing their own needs is in conflict with the desire to care for children and young people and to prioritize the kids. And I think there is still a journey of work for us to go to help people realize that those things are not in conflict. We will do better, we'll do a better job, and we will be better professionals when we can get help when we need it, and when we don't feel like there's something wrong with us because we're not permanently okay. Nobody is permanently okay. That's just life. And presenteeism in our schools is very high. I'm not going to spend much time talking about this today because there's not a lot you can do about presenteeism when you've got absence rates at the levels that we see across the sector, but it is a conversation for us to come back to, and it's something I think that we need to discuss at a policy level as well. Schools are structurally quite fragile when it comes to absence, and it's very difficult to cover that easily. So we end up with, we've just done some research with middle leaders, one of whom shared a story, a secondary school middle leader who on the way to school was in a car accident and was in the ambulance, got to A&E. He got to A&E maybe at about sort of 7 a.m. He rang the school at 7 a.m. to say, I'm in A&E, lads, I'm not going to be in, and got shouted at for not being in school. He got shouted at for not being in school, but he got extra shouted at because he hadn't prepared cover for the lessons that he was missing. So he thought he got himself attended to in A&E, and he thought, well, the person on the other end of that phone was having a bad day. He dragged himself back into work the next day, and he got dressed down again for not having prepared cover for his absence the previous day. Now that speaks of a kind of madness in the system. And if we are really that fragile in our schools, we do have a structural issue that we need to address. There is good news in the education sector, you'll be pleased to know. The stuff that puts petrol in the tank of the workforce, that energizes teachers, is really clear and comes through the research. And actually, it's part of what sat behind that spike in well-being that we saw during the first lockdown. Because people experienced collegiality in a far more intimate way. There was a sense of everybody being in it together and having each other's back. And when we researched that period of time, those messages came through loud and clear. Collegiality matters more to educators than it does to other professionals. It's a key driver that attracts people, by and large, to the profession, because you're a rather relational sort of professional. So collegiality is something that our workforce really appreciates and thrives on and recognizes and experiences. It's a positive that they see and feel every day. Appreciation is also pretty high when it comes to a sense of appreciation from colleagues. People feel that colleagues in schools, that senior managers and school leaders in schools generally appreciate what they do and understand what the lengths that they go to deliver what they do for their students, for their children and young people. And that sense of appreciation is not at all common across workplaces, but it is incredibly closely linked with job satisfaction. And job satisfaction in turn is linked with our ability to do the best job that we can. So whatever it is that we're doing in schools around appreciation and making sure that people feel appreciated, we need to continue doing. Those moments of seeing somebody reach out beyond themselves or do something that doesn't come naturally to them or isn't particularly instinctive, and taking the time to notice it and comment on it has a much greater impact than you could ever imagine. And where we develop those practices and that becomes second nature to us, we start to create virtuous circles within the environment that we're in. And in terms of well-being, actually, that stuff is gold dust. It doesn't take a fancy program of, there's lots of stuff in the well-being space that's shiny and new. I understand there's something called hay bathing, which is really taken off, where you loll about on some alpine hay, fermented hay from Austria, that's infused with herbs, and your life is going to be dramatically better after you've done so. I believe that's quite fashionable currently. I haven't hay-bathed myself, so I want to be clear, it would be wrong of me to comment one way or another. But I just think before I go hay-bathing, I'm probably going to give the owl appreciation a bit of a go first. And my hunch is that for me as a leader with my staff team, that may work quite well. Not just because they don't strike me as kind of fermented hay type of people, but just because it is in the stuff of what we do day in, day out. We don't always need something fancy or flashy or additional. We just need to do the basics really, really well, and appreciation is a great example of that. And the last one is purpose. For a lot of people in a lot of jobs, finding meaning in the work is in itself a job. People are kind of doing a job and they're desperately looking for, but what is the meaning in this? And you all do a job that is infused with meaning. Your work is like the definition of meaningful. And that makes it very different from lots of other jobs and lots of other sectors. Meaningful work is pretty much the best antidepressant there is. When we feel connected to a purpose, when we can operate and carry out our day-to-day work and know that what we are doing is meaningful, the impact on us personally is enormous. Just in the same way that the net effect of being generous is tremendously positive on the person who is the generous one. It sort of seems like that might be the wrong way around or a paradox, but it's not. And where so many other parts of the economy are looking for meaning, there are branding agencies that exist to put meaning and purpose into work. That's the one thing, it's like the superpower that you have in education. Because literally every day you're making a difference for children and young people. Every single day, you're changing futures. You don't get more profound than that. And it's very easy for us to get distracted from it because there's so much noise. We heard yesterday, Paul made his speech and talked about the ridiculousness. You know, there's no government in Northern Ireland. There's a bloated middle tier in Wales. What's going on in England is just not edifying politically, is it? It's very easy to attend to that and to feel quite enraged or despondent in the face of it. But actually, coming back to our purpose, coming back to the nuts and bolts and the bread and butter is how we get through, I think, the rage and the despondency. And there's some science behind that, which we'll come on to shortly. So the drivers of poor well-being are the stuff that you'd expect. It's workload, it's work-life balance, a lack of. Pupil behaviour, not necessarily the behaviour always, but the consistency around how behaviour is handled, and line management. These are the big things that the education workforce says drive stress. Accountability does come up, but not for a single teacher at a single point in time or a single member of support staff. It certainly comes up for our school leaders more immediately. We take a systemic approach to well-being, and we do that because it helps to depersonalize it. So what we've understood from all of the research about well-being and mental health for the workforce is in education it exists at the intersection between the individual, what's going on for them personally, the workplace and how well that fits with them and their values, and the policy environment, and the extent to which what's going on in the policy environment makes the profession feel valued or not. And I suppose what I want you to take from that is it's not always personal. And if we can help our staff understand that, that can be very useful as well. Sometimes people get very entrenched in positions with their line manager. They feel it's a very personal thing and don't understand that actually there's a much wider set of drivers beyond that that are affecting, that basically distill down into the experience that they're having. It's some examples of this in the policy environment: accountability, identity, appreciation, the lack of, when it comes to that, from some of our governments, are not known for appreciating the education workforce routinely, we could say. At the workplace level, culture and leadership are the most important thing. If nothing matters nearly as much in education as the culture and leadership in a specific school. The collegiality and the opportunities for that, good professional development and the opportunity to reflect. And individually, it's about line management, the extent of autonomy somebody has, how their workload is, not just volume, but the intensity of that workload, and the emotional content of a role. We are seeing increasingly, climbing up that list of drivers of poor well-being is the extent of social, emotional, and mental health issues that are experienced by our children and young people. And post-pandemic, we're seeing those issues increase. A colleague was talking yesterday on the motion around safeguarding, said they'd seen a threefold increase in the number of safeguarding issues that the school had dealt with between December and April. I'm a safeguarding governor in a primary school in inner London, and it's very real. The issues that we see, both safeguarding issues, but also the social and emotional issues that are coming up. And exposure to those issues over and over again for the teachers on the ground matters. You cannot every day spend your time working with people who are experiencing extreme poverty or who are in a situation where they are not safe and not be affected by it. The only point in time where you stop being affected by it is when you're burnt out, when you can't feel anymore. The support that we provide to our staff, the resources that we put in place in schools, and the time that we make as leaders to let ourselves just sit with that become really, really important. If we don't make that time, then we're at much higher risk of burnout. And one of the key factors of burnout is emotional exhaustion, and it's something that we see very high rates of symptoms of when we research the health of the education workforce. The only response to emotional exhaustion that works is rest and recovery. You cannot work your way out of it. You can't just do another week and it will be better at the end of the week. It just doesn't work. So we can choose to build in rest and recovery, or we can keep going. But if we keep going, the way it ends won't be our choice necessarily, because we're not in control of that outcome at that point. The body will do its thing. Stress has cardiovascular implications. It affects the immune system. It affects the musculoskeletal system. All of those things kick in. So our ability to deal with the emotional exhaustion that we might be experiencing becomes really, really critical. I've done a lot of research. Our organization's been in this field for 145 years, and I've distilled the wisdom into this really complicated theory. It's pretty dense, so, you know, I know it's the morning after the night before, but breathe deeply, my friends, and maybe you'll be able to keep up with this incredibly complex idea. If we want to address the well-being and mental health of our staff teams, and indeed of ourselves, there's really only two things we can do. We can reduce the sources of stress, and we can increase the opportunities that we have for recovery, for resilience. And that's really it. Sometimes there are massive sources of stress and we'd like to obliterate them completely, but we can't. But maybe we can reduce them by 5% or even 10%. And if we do that across a whole basket of sources of stress, we start to make a meaningful difference. And in terms of protective resilience, this is the wellspring from which we draw when times are tough. You can't do unfortunately, you can't do a just-in-time bit of work here. It's got to be it's got to come up through all the practices that you have in life, however that is for you. And we all have different ways of recovering and resting. I work with some really wholesome colleagues who do mindfulness and retreats and are so pure, it's unbelievable. That's not my own personal way. My recovery comes through some raucous nights of laughter with good friends and food that's probably far too rich. It comes from miserable music and stomping up mountains. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. The point is you find the thing that's for you and you make it a priority to do it. And it is that, it's not directly linked, but it is that which gives you the strength to draw on at a future date. Audre Lorde was a civil rights activist and a writer, and she had something to say on this. Self-care, the concept of self-care really got embraced by the Black Panther movement and the civil rights movement. That's when it started to be considered as something people take seriously. And so Lorde says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. For you as activists, this really matters. Whether you think that looking after yourself is important just because you're worth it, just because you should is one thing. But understanding that your ability to make the difference that you make in the world, your ability to sustain your energy for the long term is dependent on how well you care for yourself. And there are people who have changed the world who, when they reflect back, know this to be true. We can work 70 and 80-hour weeks, but we can't do it forever. It's not sustainable. We have to set the boundary. If we don't set the boundary, we will keel over. It really is that simple. So if we care deeply, and our instinct is to work around the clock because we care deeply, we have to stand back and we have to hold Audre in our minds and think, no, actually, if I really want to make this difference, if I really want to affect the change I want to affect, I need to make the time to attend to myself so that I am able to turn up tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after for as long as it takes to keep trying to make a difference. And I don't want to be a bad news fairy, but are there any West Wing fans in the house? A few. So, I love the West Wing. We'll have a little party outside later, will we? I don't want to be the bad news fairy, but Jed Bartlett is not going to become Prime Minister. That's not our future. Ted Lasso is not going to take over the education portfolio. That's not just around the corner. These are not politically edifying times. And when you're active in politics in the way that members of a union are, that can feel very hard. But we can't link our sanity to the political context. We cannot allow our own well-being to depend on the political climate. The long-term game, Audre Lorde, Over time, in community, as a collective, we make change. And our job is to keep ourselves well to do that. Teddy Roosevelt, there's a great quote from Roosevelt that I've posted up on my wall at home above my computer, because there are times in pandemic when in our work, in our clinical work, supporting thousands of people in distress, it could be a bit overwhelming. And you look around you sometimes and think, for what? How are we ever going to change the mess that we're in? And Roosevelt's words have a way of grounding me and helping me to stay in the present tense when he says, do what you can with what you have where you are. It's just about now. And if I stay in that place, then I don't have to get overwhelmed. I feel angry about a whole load of things, but I can channel that. I don't need to be disillusioned, and I don't need to become hopeless in the face of it. Do what you can with what you have where you are. I want to draw your attention to some of the signs that are associated with ill health, with mental health issues, with emotional health issues, and with being tired in life after a pandemic. Any one of these symptoms isn't really something to be too concerned about. But what I want to just draw your attention to is if you find in yourself or in others clusters or patterns of these symptoms, then that is the body's way of asking you to stop and slow down. And these are not warnings to ignore. We work with too many people who didn't know how to stop and then were forced to stop. And if you get to the point of burnout, it's not a fast place to recover from. It doesn't happen quickly. It takes a lot of time and a lot of recovery to get through it. So if we can get better at noticing in ourselves when we're not in great shape, that's going to be incredibly helpful. And it is part of being very stressed. A function of being very stressed is that we desensitize. Our bodies desensitize, our brains disconnect from what's going on in the body, and we don't notice. We're wandering around with thumping chests or tight muscles, or we're not breathing properly, but we don't notice, because that's part of what stress does. It desensitizes us. So try and pay some attention to your physical self and try and attend to those around you. And when you notice those sorts of symptoms, take the time to have a conversation or just check in or get some advice around it. Please don't ignore it. I also just want to draw your attention to some of the recent research around stress. Stress and the source of stress are very easily conflated. I mean, I said myself earlier, reduce the sources of stress, and that does matter. But what that does is stops future stress affecting you. The scientific research is now very strong, the evidence base is very strong around the understanding that stress is an embodied thing. It sits in our system, a bit like an air bubble. If you ever get an air bubble in your heating system, you know, it's in there. You can't just will it out, and you can't just run the boiler faster or hotter to get rid of the air bubble. That's not how it works. You have to actually drain it out to get it out. And stress is a bit like that in our systems. So whilst stopping a stressor stops future stress, and that's a great thing, the stress that's in our systems is still there, and we need to find a way to release it. The very best way of all to release stress is to take physical exercise. That is heads above everything else. That is the most important thing to do. And that can be just walking. It doesn't have to be anything overly exotic. But if we are not doing that, our brain doesn't know that it's safe to let go of the stress and tension the body's holding. And for as long as the body holds it, it's impacting the immune system and the cardiovascular system and the musculoskeletal system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So learning how to deal with your own stress becomes quite an important part of staying well. There are other things you can do, and some of you will have heard me say this before, and I still say it with a straight face. Hugging someone for 20 minutes, I can't keep a straight face. Hugging someone for 20 minutes, 20 seconds. I mean, by all means, hug someone for 20 minutes if you've got someone you want to hug for 20 minutes. Hugging someone for 20 seconds does the same thing. The physical messages in the brain go, I'm safe, because I must feel safe if I'm hugging someone for 20 seconds. The brain must go into overdrive if you do it for 20 minutes. I must feel safe, therefore I can let the stress go, I can complete the stress cycle. Kissing someone for 6 seconds has the same impact. See, I told you this was going to be free, right? Free support from education support. Go off and kiss someone for 6 seconds. The brain thinks if you're happy kissing this person for 6 seconds, you're clearly feeling safe. You can let it go. You can let the tension go. Having a really good laugh, having a really good cry, spending time with people whose company you thoroughly enjoy, those are the remedies for stress. I mean, it's not the worst prescription in the world, really. And those really do work. There is a body of scientific literature which clarifies this. We know it's scientific because it comes with measurements in seconds. Before I sign off, I just want to say something about this moment we're in, you know, with how tough things feel. And a lot of people have talked about how tough things feel. We did have the conversation that Jed Bartlett's not going to become Prime Minister. But we also come back to the idea of what it means to be a leader in all of this. There's a writer called Meg Wheatley who writes about the nobility of leadership. And she would say that in just this circumstance, where all around us feels chaotic and crazy and wrong, that continuing to do the right thing every time we do it, that is the nobility of leadership. And that we find others who think in the same way. And in our community with them, we join up our little islands of sanity. And that's how we get through these times. The path to the future isn't predetermined. We're shaping it with each small act that we take in our own local contexts. And for all that these times may feel difficult, for all that we live in the times that elected Donald Trump. We also live in the times that elected Nelson Mandela. In the UK, we have Boris Johnson as the national leader. But we also, and I'm no royalist, we also have the Queen, the kind of polar opposite of Boris Johnson in terms of public service, I think, and stability. We live in a time where an MP can sit watching porn in the House of Commons. We also live in a time where the Me Too movement, which starts out by advocating on behalf of the most vulnerable black and brown women who've been sexually assaulted, can come to the fore as an international movement and make a genuinely meaningful difference in our politics. Both are true, the light and the dark. And I think as leaders, that's what we have to hold. And where we can, we put our attention to the lighter side of that. Do what you can with what you have, where you are. There is a very sort of celebrity therapist called Esther Perel, who is an expert on relationships, both personal and work relationships. And I want to finish by just drawing to your attention her remarks recently. She says that too often these days, we bring the best of ourselves to work and the leftovers home. I don't know for how many of you that resonates, but when we talk about purpose and when we talk about well-being, we have to remember to live a full and happy life. And in living that full and happy life, in having that balance, the balance is energizing and it's stabilizing. It helps us to be a better professional. It helps us to be a better activist. It also helps us to enjoy those things and to enjoy being a parent, a partner, a friend. Attending to those relationships and finding your own balance, putting the life into the work-life balance, is the one thing I'd ask you to think about when you go home after this conference. I'm honoured to work alongside you all as educators, to work alongside the workforce, and to support and advocate on your behalf. As a parent of 9 and 11-year-olds, and as a taxpayer, I personally thank you for all that you do. You do make the world of difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Sinead, so much for giving of your time this Saturday morning to come to speak to our conference. Over the past couple of years, I've been really fortunate. I've heard Sinead speak on many occasions, and every single time I hear you speak, Sinead, you cause me to reflect. I learn something new. You challenge me, but in a positive way, and you help me to be a better school leader, and I also hope a better husband and a better father. And I want to thank Sinead because Sinead has been so committed to making the partnership during my presidential year with NAHT a successful one. She has attended numerous branch and regional meetings, both online and in person, to encourage and support our members. And we really appreciate the work that you have done personally and the work that your colleagues also do to support our members in time of need. And although, of course, my presidential year will be ending this summer, I really hope that our union's partnership with education support is going to continue for some time to come. The issue of the emotional and the mental well-being of school leaders is going to be such a top priority for many years to come, both for recruitment and retention purposes. And through NAHT working closely with education support will demonstrate that we will continue to prioritize the well-being of our members. Conference, I'm sure you'll agree with me, it has been an absolute privilege for us to listen to Sinead this morning. Can we please show our appreciation again?
Thank you, Conference. We now have a short debate and policy making session. We're going to finish at 10:20 for a break so that we can set up for our speaker. So we will try to do at least one, possibly two, of the motions from the sections on school leader wellbeing and paying conditions. Just a few things. I think Sinead talked there about what you can do when you're feeling angry or as we might be at the moment for a number of reasons, as I expressed yesterday. But you can turn that anger into energy and that energy into action. So if you do want to speak today, we're encouraging people to come up to the 2-minute mic, any of the motions, if you've got any sort of experience that you want to add to get that diversity of voices and involvement of people. That would be fantastic. We are saying as well on motions today, if the seconder doesn't have anything they necessarily want to add, then you don't need to come up and say seconding. We'll just take it as read. But if you do want to add something to the debate, you're obviously very welcome within the time allowed. Okay, so we are on to motion 6, I believe. And the proposer is Nikki Smith, and the seconder is Jane Gascoigne.
Good morning, Conference. Nikki Smith, Bath and North East Somerset. I have something prepared and I will read it. However, as I've sat listening to Sinead, many of the things that she has said have resonated well with me. In January of 2020, I was interviewed by Points West for the television. I cried. I may well cry this morning. I cried because I felt helpless. They were interviewing me about what was going to happen at 8 p.m. that evening. What choice was I going to make? Did I know what the Prime Minister was going to say? Every day in my school, I deal with child protection. Every day I speak to children who have suffered domestic violence. Every day I speak to parents who are living in poverty. Every day I speak to staff who are going through divorce, who have suffered death in their families. And on that day in January, I was left wondering what I was going to do for my staff, my pupils, and my families again. And once again, I was on my own, and I needed to make those decisions. And I needed to make those decisions at 8 p.m. And I needed to ensure that all my families knew by 8:45 the next morning what we were going to do. I'm not the only one. Every head teacher in the country had to make the same decision. And every head teacher in that country probably felt the same stress as I did. There was nobody to turn to. It was night time. Disclosures from traumatised children, child death, domestic violence, staff death, acts of aggression, negative social media, complaints and external pressures were the norm for senior leaders before the pandemic. The addition of the pandemic only added to our stresses. Yesterday, one colleague commented that we are so saturated, we get to the point where we cannot function. I am getting to that point. 25% of primary head teachers and 37% of secondary head teachers who started in 2015 had left by 2020, an increase of 16% since 2011. A recent NAHT survey stated only 30% of school leaders would recommend it as a career. I love my job. I would not recommend it to anyone. Due to the enormous pressures, nearly half of the head teachers are likely to leave prematurely. I am a widow. I am desperate to leave. I hope I will leave on my 55th birthday. 75% of school leaders feel their role has a negative impact on their mental health. I am one of those heads, and there will be many others in this room. Every day, we put on our smile, we put on our brave faces, we return to our schools, and we face the next challenge, determined to help, but at what cost? We have to reverse these trends. If we believe in compassion and humanity, we need to demand with solidarity the right to fully funded, regular supervision provided by a trained mental health expert. We need to make it clear that it should never be the role of the head teacher to provide supervision in their schools. We are not mental health experts. Work life is becoming too much for too many. We love our jobs, but for too many, it has become mentally exhausting. Yesterday, our colleague from Cumbria said he constantly mulls over, has he done enough? He will have done more than enough. But we know that the constant feeling of what else can I do, that constant feeling of what else can we do, too often we feel helpless. The DFE say they are improving support for head teachers. I ask when and how. We need it now. I call upon the National Executive to do everything in their power to ensure statutory funded supervision for all senior leaders. Conference, I move.
Thank you, Nikki. So I think this is people on the 2-minute mic. Please come forward if you want to speak. Branch, name and branch.
Jane Gascoigne, I'm here to second this motion. You've heard Sinead this morning. You've seen the emotion in Nikki. We can't not do anything about this. We need to do something now. I second this, and I'm proud to second it.
Have we got anyone else for the 2-minute mic on this? Please come up. Yeah, we seem to have a queue, so just keep them coming. you give your name and branch, please.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Jen Brown, and I'm from the Dudley branch, and this is my first conference. I really do endorse and resonate with so much that has been said this morning, both by the proposer, seconder, and by Sinead. But I have written a few things because I wanted to get it right. So I left headship in August 2020, which was a terrible time to finish in the profession that I have loved for 40 years. But that's a different story. Since then, with my plans for educational support on hold, I've been training as a play therapist. One compulsory element is regular supervision with a trained supervisor. And that has afforded me the chance to process things that I've encountered in my training, but also the things that I encountered as a head. I firmly believe that had I had access to quality supervision during my headship, I would have been less stressed and I would have been better able to do my job. Not that I was bad at it, but you can always do better. It's particularly important when we deal with those things that have already been mentioned, the safeguarding, the families in crisis, the staffing concerns, even Ofsted, as headship can be such a lonely place. As others have said, other professions have access to supervision, and I firmly believe that heads should too. You don't miss what you don't know, but having experienced at it, I can see how beneficial supervision could have been and is for me now. I firmly support the motion, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Claire Evans, Sandwell Branch and West Midlands. I have had supervision since 2017. I was a deputy head and a lead DSL at the time of starting the supervision. I worked at Anderton Park as a deputy head, and some of you might know of the protest that happened in 2019, and regular supervision saved me. It stopped me from going under. Sorry. I know it doesn't happen all the time. The protests were 1 off or 2 off or 3 off. But at that point, the regular supervision and having a safe space to talk, I could talk to my husband, but we had a police marker on our house, and my husband felt really cross about the whole situation. So whenever I spoke to my husband about it, he felt cross on my behalf, and he felt upset. So I wasn't able to have that safe space where I could talk about it without it creating anxiety for him, for my family, my 2 young boys. I have kept regular supervision. When I became a head teacher in September, when I was offered the post of head teacher, I asked the governing body, I have had this regular supervision, would you still pay for it for me? And they said yes, which is amazing. Since becoming head teacher in September, I have now ensured that my lead DSL has regular supervision, because she regularly sits in my office and we have a good cry and a good moan about the state of all the things that we talked about yesterday in terms of social care. So I completely back this motion, and I'm just really thankful for the people who've brought it today.
Thank you. Just to say, we will hear from everybody in that queue, but we want nobody else to join that so we can get the session. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, colleagues. Graham Frost from Cumbria branch. I'd like to just pay tribute to all of those of you that are in the room as serving NHT officials, giving up of your time to support colleagues in your branches. And what I would say to the motion, which I do support, although I do have one slight quibble over wording which might be found to be helpful by some. So the first thing to say then is that we do find support from our colleagues, and we often do find informal supervision through the support of colleagues. I know I have found that through from people that are in the room. And so thank you for all that you do to keep me on the right track. I'd also echo what Sinead has said, that in finding purpose, we often find a resolution to a lot of stress and anxiety. And through NAHT, and I think we should say that, we should encourage people who are listening to live streams, who are tuning into NAHT, to recognise that actually by getting involved in NAHT, it is a route to finding a lot of remedy to some of the feelings of isolation that we can feel in this job, which is so demanding. So the point of adjustment I would suggest, the motion says conference calls on National Executive to press the government to provide the resources and funding for a national programme of supervision for school leaders. So I would just change resources and funding for a national programme which includes access to supervision. A lot of people already have come to the mic have used that phrase, access to, because we need to acknowledge the fact that we find the supervision that we need in informal and through NAHT as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just check with Nikki Smith then, if that's a friendly amendment? Would you happy to change the wording? Where's Nikki? Is that okay, Nikki? A conference happy with that? If you raise your hand, if you're content, or thank you very much. I think that's pretty much going to be a majority. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm Roger Blackburn, and I am from Salford. Over the last couple of years, as we all know, school leaders have had to make some very, very difficult decisions which have impacted hugely on the staff we work with. We are responsible for ensuring the most vulnerable children in our society were still able to attend school throughout the first lockdown. We provided much needed support to frontline workers in social care, the NHS, police and other critical worker services. And we provided the support and encouragement to our own staff to actually get them to come into school and do their jobs effectively. For many school leaders, no formal support networks were in place, and we relied on the cooperation and support of colleagues to help us through some very dark days, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. Supervision is a vital part of many other professions, including social care, the NHS, many others. And the role of supervision cannot be understated, and many of us currently provide supervision for our own members of staff in our own organisations or others. The benefits of supervision are clear. Not only does the supervisee benefit from the professional dialogue, but so does the supervisor. Supervision can provide much needed support for professional practice and reflection. It can improve outcomes for children, as well as supporting continual professional development and improving well-being. Supervision can also help us create a supportive and caring and positive environment, and can provide us with many of the important time and space that we need to reflect on our work as school leaders. I fully support this motion, conference.
Thank you.
Good morning, Nick Whitehouse, Birmingham branch. This is my first time at conference. First of all, I want to say thank you to Nikki for such an impassioned delivery. It really touched my heart, so thank you very much. I completely back this motion because I took over as head teacher about 3 weeks before the first lockdown, and it was a really isolating and scary experience. And if it wasn't for the support informally of colleagues locally to me in the NAHT and more widely, I'd have gone under totally. So having an organised and structured access for new leaders, new head teachers to supervision would really be beneficial to them. So I completely endorse this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Morning, colleagues. Mick Murphy, Wolverhampton branch. Supervision can mean different things to different people. We must make sure that when National Council take this on, that we very, very carefully define what supervision actually is. It can mean different things to different people. I've had supervision that does not feel like supervision. And when people get hold of this, it could very easily turn into something else. It's not an opportunity for somebody else to take another swipe at us.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that if anybody is feeling stressed, if you stand by the door and have a 20-second hug from everybody that comes in tonight, you'll start to feel a lot better.
Hi, Julie Kelly, Hampshire Branch and National Executive. So in London last year, I stood up and did the motion, who's safeguarding the safeguarding lead? And partway through that speech, I started to shake uncontrollably because, as Education Support said, these things don't go away. It's a PTSD, and it comes back when you start to face that situation again. So obviously, I support this because we said the same thing last year. I'd also like to say the fact that the Secretary of State for Education couldn't be bothered to come to our conference yesterday, but was actually in the vicinity in the evening, shows that this government does not understand the pressure we're all under, and this really needs to be pushed urgently. And I know National Exec are calling upon Paul Whiteman to take this to government and make sure that they're really clear about the effect it's having on our leaders and on the recruitment. Thank you. I support this motion.
Chris Kirkham-Knowles, Yorkshire Region, and also one of the people on National Exec who is about to do some pressing by the looks of it, because this will have full support and has my backing. I think that it's interesting just standing there in that queue, and please to go and join it, but be ready to reshape what you're going to say based on the what people come up and say before you. Supervision does come in many shapes and guises. I know from my colleagues who work in social care, who have it as part of their terms and conditions, that it's very much about supporting them to be able to do their job more effectively and to cope with the pressures of their job. If it became anything else because that word government is in it, I'd be very, very concerned. The other part of my speech is really around the fact that in this room and beyond this room, in terms of our membership NAHT, from my experience as a senior leader for many years, this organisation is brilliant at it, but not every member accesses it. And I'm not sure how many people in the room will know that NAHT actually has a mentorship program that is out there. And if you go onto the NAHT website, you'll see it. So I'm here to do a bit of an advert, really, for that mentorship program and to formalise it for a lot of us who might not have done it already, to sign up and either become a mentor or be mentored by someone with experience who's willing to lend you that support. So just before my colleague comes on and finishes, is a bit of a commercial break for you to have a look at that, because I think it will make significant difference for our members. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Caroline Hoyle from South Central Branch, and this is my first conference. So I just wanted to also place this within the kind of framework in which we all live, where we live in a top-down world where the government tells us what to do, doesn't listen effectively to us, and doesn't trust us. So I fully support this motion, but one of the earlier speakers talked about the fact that we're asking and saying that supervision is something that is required in schools could also be seen as a negative thing, that actually school leaders are asking for help. But you know what? It's okay for us all to ask for that help and to say that we need that support, because our schools and our education system cannot function in a world where so many of us are dealing with such great stress and we are experiencing health issues as a result of it. So I fully support this motion, but I would just ask the National Executive to please bear that in mind. This mustn't turn into another way that we can be beaten up and bashed in the press. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for contributing and showing your humanity there. We're going to have a vote now. I think I know which way it's going to go. If all those in favour, would you raise your hand? That's with the amendment, of course. Thank you. And those against? Oh, sorry. That's carried unanimously. Folks, Do I do that to close the session? Anyway, we're going to have a break now. We're going to just extend it by 5 minutes. So can we be back in here at 10:55 sharp? We have got a visitor and a speaker. So have a break. Go and have a hug. Have a kiss. Equalities Network. Oh yeah. Could the people who are asking Bridget Phillipson some questions, could they stay here? Come and see the staff. Natalie over on the staff table. Thank you. Is that all right?
Coming from business into a primary school, it really was, there were no challenges necessarily from the community, from my colleagues, or in necessarily being a leader within the school, but certainly challenges about the way that I might address questions that may be asked, or how I responded to particular questions.
I was an openly gay head teacher, but I was the only one that I knew of. And I thought, you know what, there's 23,500 schools in the country. There's got to be other people in the same situation as me.
For me, it was, I wanted to bring a positive aspect, and actually to be able to share that with colleagues or with the wider education really, that there is a positive side to it, that people didn't have to be concerned about it necessarily. Be private if you wish, don't come out if you wish, it's absolutely, your choice. But that there was a voice there that was a supportive voice, and there was somebody to go to if you just needed an ear to bend, I suppose.
That's what drew me to the NAHT Leaders, LGBT Leaders Network, to have that support network for myself, but also to offer that support network to other leaders.
So really it is a soundboard, or I would see it as a soundboard going forward, to be able to allow every school or every organisation to offer LGBT plus support for staff, pupils and the wider community.
It comes back to leaders being able to be themselves in their workplace, and the positive benefits that also has for the children.